and I'll hand it over to the presenters.
All right. Should I go first?
Yeah, you go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Hey, I'm Mark Hussey, and I'm English faculty and online instructional coach at Front Range Community College. And I do most of my work way up in Fort Collins on the North Campus. Um, and I've been instructional coaching, working with online teachers for the last 3 years, and decided to, well, when AI emerged, I was like, oh, this is really going to impact my teaching of English because students can have a robot do a lot of the writing and writing process now. So I was like, Kay, I need to talk to you. I need help. And then Kay introduced me to open pedagogy, and I think it's been a lot of fun since then.
Hi everybody. I'm Kay Novak, Assistant Director of Learning Design at Front Range Community College. I got involved with Mark on this because our college got an OER grant from the Colorado Department of Education, and it was considered for advanced OER. So it was more than just like, oh, let's use OER and not have textbooks. It was asking for open pedagogy. It was asking to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Mark was able to do something that totally worked when it came to advanced OER. And I'll let you take it away then, Mark.
Great. I'm going to put one quick question in the chat. And the question is, what would you like to know about open pedagogy? Um, we'll see if we can, that'll give us some question fodder for questions, if we can get to them towards the end. But hopefully we give you enough so that you learn about open pedagogy and learn how I think it can really help us adapt to AI technology and just changing technology happening along the way. I wanted to start with this AI produced image. I use this in my open pedagogy class as one of the welcome to the course module. Here's your introduction. And the prompt I used said something to the effect of, I want an image of two people arguing about whether or not we should colonize Mars. And I specifically said two people. And ChatGPT threw in a third astronaut arguing about this question. And I thought that was really appropriate that now there's an extra person in all of our classrooms. And I don't use the word person lightly. And I don't mean to imply that it has any type of actual personhood, but in a very real way, it's a collaborator in the classroom that I don't think we can ignore. As one of my colleagues puts it, you can run, but you can't hide. ChatGPT, AI, it's out of the bag, and we're going to have to learn to work with it or work around it, but we can't hide from it. But I do think that changing technology raises a couple of really important questions, especially in English, where I'm teaching. What it means to be a writer is different today than it was a year and a half ago when I was first hearing about what ChatGPT is. I am not entirely confident I could say what it will mean to be a writer in 2 years. And I'm not sure I know what being a writer is going to look like in 6 months even. That's how quickly things are changing just because of this technology that got introduced. I think it'll have implications in other fields beyond English. What will it look like to do chemistry labs in a couple of years? How will AI work with that? I think the other question that's happening is I am no longer certain if I'm assessing artifacts of student learning or AI generated artifacts. It's really hard to distinguish what's what. And I might have Kay talk about Turnitin and how that's problematic and storing and saving student writing. But I just am really tired of playing the game of gotcha with catching people at cheating when they're really in a competitive situation, trying to get grades, trying to get through college. And so I think a question is, how do we assess student learning in this new digital era that we're entering? And then this is a question that the open pedagogy really asks is, what is the value of traditional educational activities? Like writing essays, taking tests, traditional, multiple choice exams. What's the value of digging into that? And are there other ways of doing assessments and doing learning activities that will be better suited to where humanity might be going? So my hope is that AI, or not AI, open pedagogy, or OP, we abbreviate it, will help to answer some of these questions. But I'm going to let Kay give you an overview of just what open pedagogy is.
And I'm looking at the chat, and I've been asked not to say names. So Anonymous 1, how does the implementation of open pedagogy practices impact student engagement and learning outcomes? Jessica, Mark will be answering that when he's pulling things up. The next, Anonymous number 2, what does open pedagogy encompass? OER, open source tools rather than commercial software, social construction of norms, materials, etc. That one, I'll be answering like that one right away. And then the last one from an Anonymous number 3, how does open pedagogy support learners from multiple backgrounds and folks with disabilities? We'll be answering that one a little bit later on, because when Mark pulls up things from his class, I think that will, I think that it will show that. So first, this is the slide that's killing the disposable assignment. I absolutely love that. And what killing the disposable assignment is, all of us have gone through courses where we kill ourselves to come up with a perfect essay, a perfect project, perfect something or other, and the only person who ever sees it is the instructor, and they grade it, and then we don't use it again. The concept of open pedagogy is that when your students create things, they are creating artifacts that they can use and they can take out into the world. They might do that themselves. It might be that you look for some opening, like you make a website, or you share it, say, with a professional organization, or that what they create will be used to help teach the course the next time the course is taught. So that's the idea of open pedagogy. So it goes beyond. So OER resources, for the most part, are created by experts, professors, educators, things like that. Open pedagogy has your students creating the open the open educational resources. And as far as there's another term that Anonymous number 2 in the chat, open source tools rather than commercial software.
You can call me okay. It's
okay.
fine.
Hey, Brandon said that. Look, if you have a computer science class and your students are creating something and they share it out out with people, yeah, that would be considered open pedagogy too. Social construction of norms. I wouldn't necessarily call open pedagogy that, other than we're trying to kill a disposable assignment. We're trying to give voice to students. We're trying to let their experiences be part of the curriculum and be part of the content. And then that content is then open for everyone else. Okay. And you can, and feel free to go to the next slide, Mark. OER, just in general, a lot of people know this already. know what open OER is. And Anonymous number 3 is, how will the need for this to be accessible be reconciled with student created content? Quite honestly, that when you're having your students do these things for open pedagogy, you let them know, you teach them, if they don't already know, because they might already know, what is needed for it to be accessible. then that means creating creating with videos with captions, learning how to do alt tags for images. Okay, these things aren't very difficult, and our students adjust to that pretty quickly once you start talking to them about it. So that's what I would say about that. Next slide. These are the 5 R's of OER: retain, reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. And again, once again, a lot of times it's just the faculty or the expert who's been doing this. Open pedagogy is you teach your students about this. And part of this is also teaching them about Creative Commons licensing. So that they can go ahead and they can make decisions about that. And then the last one for me is the definition. So the official official definition, if you want to take a screenshot of this one, it's teaching and learning practices where openness is enacted with all aspects of instructional practice. The design of learning outcomes, the selection of teaching resources, and the planning of activities and assessment. And Mark excelled at this. Okay, and he's going to tell you about this. And I know he's going to talk more about it, but he also picked the perfect subject matter. So I'll be quiet now. It's all Mark.
I opened the pod bay doors all the way up. and I'll talk about which parts of the course you can open, because you can open all of them up or you can open some of them up. So as we go through here, keep in mind that I kind of dove in the deep end as far as I could, just because in my instructional coaching role, I have some autonomy to do that. And I think I've got some bullet points here. I'll come back to these if we need to, but I think these are things that I think help open pedagogy are going to help us be able to do going forward. But I wanted to spend a bit more time just showing you what an open pedagogy course and curriculum looks like. And then we can talk about how it may or may not be able to accomplish these things. So I wanted to share the little screenshot at the bottom here is a section of writing that my students were working on collaboratively. And you can see it's in a Google document and they're commenting on the right-hand side and drafting their prose. But one of the things they wrote in the open pedagogy book that my students produced, they wrote, "It is crucial to remember that education has always been subject to change, adaptation, and growth. Now, with AI at the forefront of educational discourse, it is imperative that we equip ourselves with the knowledge to navigate these shifts, ensuring that we are not blindsided by the transformative potential of this technology." And one thing I really like about open pedagogy is that I can now cite my students just like they're actual authors of a text, because they are actual authors of this text. And this is a group of 4 students that worked on this particular section. And let me pull up the course itself here. So what we did, I opened up, oops. Let me get a handle on my computer here. So part of open pedagogy is you're opening up the entire course to your students. And one of the things that you can open up is the actual content or textbook. So rather than me going through and selecting an OER curriculum for my English course, like Kay said, written by an expert, the problem with OERs right now is that in writing, there aren't any OER textbooks that incorporate how to use and work with and think critically about AI and writing. So one of the problems that open pedagogy solves for me is that students are doing the research and putting together a current up-to-date book on AI and writing. So originally I had it titled The Savvy Writer: Arguments in the Age of AI. This is for an English Composition 2 course. focused mainly on argumentative writing. This semester, they switched the title to Savvy Writing in the Modern Age. They added this cool AI generated image as a kind of a cover for the book. We've been working mainly on section 1 because each semester I realized that it takes a long time to get students to learn how to use these tools and learning how to navigate it. But I'll show you on the scroll bar, they've produced 65 pages of a book over a 2-semester span so far. So last fall, I started off and all I had was an outline of proposed chapters. And then each semester, students work on developing and writing out those chapters. So this spring, they picked up where my fall students had left off, and I gave them the question, what's new, what's different, what do you want to know about argumentative writing today? And they read what my fall semester students had written, and they were like, this needs to be completely redone. We don't like it. Couple of the chapters, they said, this is actually really good. We just would reorganize it. So I said, okay, do that. That's your project, is to become an expert on the chapter that you and your group are working on, and then share your expertise with the rest of the class. And one thing that I really like, their end of semester final assignment, and apologies for the dizzy scrolling, but their last assignment for the semester was to write their about the author blurb at the end of the book. So then they can now say they're a published author. They have their name at the end of a book in there. And so this is their work, and we've had to have a whole discussion on how to Creative Commons license it. And are we going to share this? Is this going to be something other people can use? And so on. So they worked through all those questions and problems, and then they wrote a ton of stuff in this book. And if I want to know something about AI and writing, this is one of the first places that I look, because it's really current, it's relevant, and I think because it's written by students, it's at their level. So if I'm looking for pedagogical insights for teaching, I think this is a good place to go. So that's one piece of it, is opening up the content. You can also, with open pedagogy, open up the learning outcomes for open discussion and dialogue. So I made a Google Doc where I have the course learning outcomes. And so down here, I have this is what the state of Colorado says that English Composition 2 covers. And then I shared with them what I think that means. And then we did an activity where basically the question is, by the end of the class, what do you want to learn? What skills do you want to develop? What knowledge do you want to acquire? And I share with them that I have some expertise in arguments, rhetoric, writing, and I can help them learn those things, but I wanted to hear from them what their own take on what they wanted to learn was. And so they put in posts in here sharing their thoughts on what it is they thought the course should do and cover. So this gives them ownership of the curriculum itself. And then after everybody brainstormed all their ideas, we went through and color coded them by theme. And then those became the learning outcomes for the course. And I see my role there is just checking to make sure that we're covering more or less what we're supposed to be covering, but giving students as much autonomy to interpret and define the learning experience itself as I can give them. So I completely opened up the learning outcomes. I also did the same thing with the course policies. So I do an alternative grading, holistically assessed course. There's no points in it. And I gave my approach to grading, where I say, if you've demonstrated a savvy level of skill with all the learning outcomes, that's what is what an A means. So the students said, okay, some of them loved it. Some of them said things like, I don't think this takes into account effort. I think we should include that in the grading scale. And so we debated and discussed in these comments and looked at the types of learning objectives and assignments that I'm including, the late policy. And so the students were contributing to, and they have editorial access to this document. So they could directly change the course policies. And then after about a week of discussing, debating, we took a vote on it and said, do we all like these policies? And then those were our course policies from there.
And Mark, we have a question, and I think it's a little more towards when you just started showing this. It's did they decide to share to others? So I'm assuming it's meaning, did your students who did this decide that they would share with others?
Yes. Yes. The one thing that I was worried about was that they would retain the license for others to go in and edit and revise. But I was like, my plan is to have my first semester group of students start this, generate a really rough draft, have my second semester students bring that rough draft a little closer to a final draft, and then my third or fourth semester editing, revising, polishing, and putting the finishing touches on it. They did agree to share it, and they agreed that to let other future students revise their work. But because it's open pedagogy, I gave them the choice to say no to that. So if they wanted to turn this into a for-profit work and sell it, I was going to let them do that.
Yeah.
And that'd be great, honestly. I don't know if it got to the level of quality in one semester to do that, but I think they did get it to a really healthy point. The other thing that I like about this is that at the end of this spring, I can email my past students and say, hey, I'd like you to come back and be a reviewer and critique the latest version of what my current students are doing. So that builds in a way for me to maintain contact with past students, that and then they can see how their book has been completely changed. So my students worked on a group collaborative project, putting together this, essentially making their own OER. And then they also collaborated on doing arguments, and I themed the course around AI and issues around AI. So, and I had them arguing directly with and against and to each other. So I had one student here, he decided to work solo and independently, but he argued that AI is going to make most human jobs disposable. And he did the best job he could. But I had another student counter arguing with, no, AI is not going to make most human jobs disposable. So I wanted them to engage with the learning outcomes by practicing argument, but also try to figure out what effect is AI going to have on our culture. And my plan for those arguments is that we will take a selection of them, and those are going to go into what's supposed to be here. At the end of each section in the Savvy Writer book will be sample arguments, where it's just student perspectives on issues in AI. So a couple other papers. I like that this one, the students decided to give themselves roles. They color coordinated their own writing. And that was one issue, is that students really have a hard time collaborating on writing projects. And I think that that's a place where I may recommend that they include collaboration as one of the outcomes of their course. Because I think that's something that where we're headed in the future, collaborative projects, I think, are really important. But they did, so they discussed and dialogued using their unique colors, and then put together their essay draft towards the bottom. So this one, they were doing the value of a work of art is unrelated to the identity of its creator. And they were really getting into art and aesthetics. The other one, here's another one saying AI use is not usually cheating. And they're having arguments about that topic. So they did a really good job just picking up controversies that are emerging right now. And so yeah, that's I opened up the learning outcomes of the course. I opened up the course text. I opened up the policies. And even as much as I could, opened up how their grades are determined. Because they have ownership of the learning outcomes, that impacts how they're graded. And I gave them input, let them have input on the level, the criteria levels. So what does it take to get an A? I let them participate in defining what that means. Just because I know this will raise a lot of questions, how I assessed that was once they developed what the outcomes of the course were, I made 4 assignment folders in D2L, 1 for each learning outcome, and they had to submit evidence of their work and their learning to these folders. So that's how I could distinguish what they did versus what their peers did. And then they could share with me what they've been working on. And this worked really well to help distinguish AI from student writing, because students are just showing me what they're learning here. And there's not a lot of incentive for them to try to cheat or game this, because this is their primary place for getting feedback from me. Another example of just what student work looks like in this setting. Just a paragraph where there's highlights everywhere, student conversation happening in the side. I really liked Google Docs as a place for me to give, I can put comments on the side and they can reply to them. I think that's a helpful venue. So with open pedagogy, I think things are changing really quickly. But because I'm able to say, hey, let's take a look at our outcomes and think if these are actually relevant right now and today. What students define as outcomes for next fall will probably be different than what they did this spring. I may suggest that we stop focusing our theme on AI so much and start just using it as a tool and reflecting on it and pick a different theme. But also, I really like that instead of assigning an argumentative essay and a rhetorical analysis and an informational paper, what they're doing here, they are writing an informational paper, but it's in the form of an OER book that other people can use. And once it's complete, I'd be happy to pass this off to my colleagues and say, hey, my students wrote this, it's really good. So that is an actual project that I think will give students a leg up when they're applying for jobs down the road, to say, yeah, I've worked on collaborative teams. I've incorporated AI writing and revised it to make it better. I know how to use Google Docs. I know about Creative Commons licensing and so on. So there, I think that's where students from diverse backgrounds, anonymous number, somebody was asking about that, but I think it's not very common for students from diverse backgrounds to get a really rich and robust training in current technology. I think switching to open pedagogy opens your curriculum up in a way where you can bring these tools into your course in ways that we maybe just don't think about if you're using a traditional textbook. I really liked flipping the conversation around cheating. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, because it has to do with giving students autonomy. But basically, if they're doing a project that they themselves created for themselves to do, there really isn't any reason for students to cheat on it. And I think a lot of cheating happens because there's a lot of pressure with grades and being able to pass a class, and students need to be able to do that. But if you take some of that pressure away and give them ownership of the work they're doing, they're more motivated to dig into that work. I liked that this helped me selfishly understand issues in AI, because I really wasn't sure what this was going to do to the field of English, but having students write arguments about it, that helped me understand those issues as well. And I think it gave students really pretty cutting edge instruction on educational tools and just tools, period. And I think the last point here is that there's a lot, and Kay helped me recognize this. It's a little bit like when the calculator was invented, suddenly education in math got more advanced. You could use the calculator to cover a lot of the basic mathematical stuff. AI does a lot of basic compositional stuff for us. It can help with brainstorming. It can help with getting feedback on drafts. It can help produce research. It's getting better at that. It still produces some research that's not real, but it can help generate more questions for research and things to look into. And it does that in seconds, which for me as an English teacher, grading and evaluating student writing is hard. So if AI can help me do some of the preliminary checking, rubric kind of checking off things, and it can give some preliminary feedback, that saves me a lot of time. But then that allows the class to move on to more advanced work. And I think in English, that means doing more time with critical thinking, and evaluating sources and working collaboratively with other humans. I think in different disciplines that'll look totally different. But if you think about what AI enables you to do, how much of your curriculum can you say, I don't need to emphasize that as much because we can do that really easily with AI now. So what is the more advanced next step to think about?
And we did have a question.
Okay.
And the person wrote, sorry if I missed this, but was it okay for them to pull in writing from ChatGPT as long as how they used it fulfilled the outcomes?
Yes. In fact, in fact, I'd say when I had them picking roles for their collaborative teams, I specifically asked them to pick a role for ChatGPT, because I think and that was Kay, you told me to do that. Or Eric maybe, but AI is basically a collaborator for writing. And that's totally different than how writing used to be, but you have a little robot assistant that helps you out now. And one of the things that it helped them learn was the limits of what AI can actually do. Because it'll produce a piece of writing, but it's not going to say anything new, or it's not going to produce a new insight. So they might be able to get some ideas like, okay, how am I going to address this research question? It's not going to give a profound answer to it, but it will give them some ideas. So I think they used it to the extent that they could, but then they really were like, okay, I want to produce a good piece of writing here. How do I do that? And that's where you do have to be really clear about what the learning outcomes are and talk about how AI is helping with that, or how AI could become a crutch for getting in the way of that. I think you can use AI to pretend you're doing critical thinking, but are you actually doing critical thinking? But these are all conversations I had with my students. So it was things they were becoming aware of and taking ownership of. And I like how this student expressed the is AI cheating or not? Every technological innovation has invariably faced skepticism, primarily centered around the fear of human redundancy. The introduction of AI in the creative sphere has been no exception. However, a more measured observation reveals that AI isn't here to overshadow human creativity, but to amplify it. And I think, first of all, that's just a really well-written statement. And I think this student did use and work with AI to develop that, but this isn't a sentence that AI is going to produce. So I think a couple of things to think about is to think what AI can't do, but also to think about what is it that students actually want or need to learn for themselves. And that's something that students are really not used to being asked. Usually they show up on day one and they're handed a syllabus and you say, this course covers these topics. We'll be doing these assignments. Here you go. Let's get started. I think now that AI can do a lot of stuff for us, it's important to ask, what do we want to be able to do? What are the skills we actually want to develop? What do we want to learn? What's important for us to know? And then that really helps put students in a place where they're developing those questions, thinking it through and saying, I don't know what I want to learn. Or how might this course help me pursue my career goals? I don't know. And it switches the conversation from how do I get an A in this class to something like, what purpose is this class doing for me? Or at least it should. I still have students that just want to get an A, but you're never going to completely get rid of that grade chasing. But I think it's worth thinking about what AI can help us do so that we don't have to. There's some really interesting ways to use AI for giving feedback on student writing, and that allows me to spend more time working one-on-one with students. I can give them bigger picture, more nuanced feedback that AI can't give, but it does a good job of correcting their grammar. That I no longer have to do that. And even students may not need to do that anymore. And if we think about AI, I think it's an order of magnitude different than past technologies. I think it's a bigger change than the calculator. I think it's closer to like the invention of the automobile or something. I think it's a substantial change, but it's always opened up education in different ways. Whenever there's a new technology, that enables humans to do different things as we interface differently with that technology. So how is this going to look today? The other piece of open pedagogy that's really important is that it lines up really well with learner-centered teaching or active learning or engaged learning, call it whatever you want, where you're basing your course around learning outcomes and you're really looking closely at what it is that students are actually learning. And you're paying a little bit less attention to what students are just doing and instead focusing on what they're learning by doing. And open pedagogy gives you more options for what you do with your class. And if you're focused on saying, okay, one of my learning outcomes is preparing students for AI, there might be 100 different ways I could go about creating activities and assignments that prepare students for AI. And all I really need to focus on with my learning outcomes is whether they're really making progress towards those outcomes. It also puts students in a place where they're doing the work in the course. Because they're writing the book, they're doing the work of putting that together. They're selecting the material. They're deciding if it's relevant or not. They're organizing it. They're literally crafting the sentences to express that material. And I think what that does is it gives students autonomy. And when you're putting them in groups working together, that gives them relatedness. If you're giving them ownership of the outcomes of the course, that relatedness sometimes gets called purpose or goal, but giving them ownership of the outcomes lets them have control over the goals of the course and the meaning of it. And doing those things all together, I think, helps build intrinsic motivation, where students start to approach learning as something they want to be doing rather than something they have a hoop they need to jump through to get a grade. And I hinted at this earlier, but you don't need to open up the entirety of your course, including your policies and outcomes. I think you want to get to know your students and think about how developmentally advanced they are. I kind of threw my students into the deep end, and some of them needed a lot of support to deal with the amount of freedom I just gave them. So how can you structure the choices that they need to make in order to decide about something like learning outcomes? Or if you give them ownership of the course policies, it's probably a good idea to say, here's a couple of policies that have been used in the past. Here's some pros and cons to how those work. But they need some structure and support with this totally different curriculum than they've ever seen before. And make sure to take time to structure and frame how students make those choices. Are you going to make it democratic? Are you going to let students opt out? But letting them know that they have choice in it, but that you're there to back them up if they need help and support. This is a different enough type of curriculum, but I think learning to be a creator of knowledge has to be something that you view as an outcome of your course when you do this. If you're having students write an open textbook for a biology course, that might be unnerving for students.
or maybe like allied health, or
Yeah,
like air traffic controlling, or
yeah, anything. But it takes a level of confidence that students maybe haven't developed from K through 12 or wherever their life got them to our class. So trying to think, how can you build and develop and foster that type of confidence has to be something that you really intentionally focus on. You don't necessarily need to make open pedagogy highly collaborative, but I think if you do, it's valuable. And just make sure you build time into planning, organizing, and reflecting on how the group work is going. Because that's, from what I've seen the last 2 semesters, students really struggle scheduling a meeting with other students to work on a project. It's tough. Then that last point, number 5, I just have a list of things that you might consider opening up in your course. Outcomes, content, doesn't have to be an entire book like I was doing. It could just be, hey, get into groups and write a chapter. And that's your project for this unit. The assessments and assignments, you could give students choice all the way to the point of letting students create and design their own assignments. Or you could say, here's 10 assignments, pick 4 that you want to do. So there's degrees that you can, it's kind of a spectrum of how open you want it to be. Course policies, I think that's a great way to get buy-in from students, is to let students open up and discuss the pros and cons of the policies in your syllabus. And they seemed to comply with them better when they participated in designing them. Grades, you could completely open up your grade book and say, at the end of the semester, you'll be submitting an argument for the grade you think you earned, and giving students a high level of autonomy with grades themselves. So that's something I'd like to experiment with. Okay. I have to give some clearly biased student samples. Not all students were as writing glowing reviews of this. A lot of them were saying, I appreciate what this instructor was trying to do, but I would have preferred a more normal class. There are definitely students that just like the comfort of traditional education. But here's a couple students that thought this worked well. I especially like the student saying that I almost feel like a journalist. And I think that's really telling me that that's accomplishing what I was aiming for, was putting them in the situation where they're actually being writers rather than kind of academically studying writing from a distance. Okay. Oh yeah, this is K made this plan.
Okay, and this is just a starting plan for anybody who's learning designer. Sometimes Mark is not one of these faculty. Mark, you go, hey, how about this thing? You want to try it? And Mark's like, oh, okay. I will tell you, there are others who are not like that. There are other people who might need something like this. Like, okay, let's go through the description and it'll feel better if they get all their thoughts out on there. And while this one's for AI, focus for AI, you could change it to anything. This is a Google document. Use it if it is useful for you. That's all I have to say. If I have to say about that. So you can hit next slide. And then as we end, let's try to Frontier Foundation. And what questions or comments do people have? And you can get a mic. Cass has a question. I'm sorry, anonymous number 3 has a question.
Would you and the students consider posting the book to open resource archives like Merlot? Yeah, that's something I need to ask my students now that we're in April suddenly, where this is going to go. But that's what I would do is show them a range of OER locations, places where it has a good chance of getting out to the general public and saying, all right, this is our publication platform. What do we need to do to get it posted and made live there? So Merlot would be great. There's a lot of places it could go.
Mark, next question. Have you tried something like this in an asynchronous online course? Your
Yes.
thoughts?
The first time I did this last fall, it was asynchronous online. I did this in person this spring, so I've tried it both ways. The challenge with asynchronous online is that I gave them too much flexibility in forming their own groups. I was trying to let them get to know each other and then form the groups. I think I'm going to try it again in the fall with online, and I'm just going to put them in a group and then say, if you want to be in a different group, let me know. Because it took like a week and a half just to get the groups arranged, and that ate into the course time.
And then the next question, and everybody who's here who's using OER, please help answer this. What are some great OER sites to utilize to find open resources? And people, please type your favorites in there. I will tell you my favorite OER site is I don't have one. I'm teaching business in the creative industries, and there are not a lot of things. There's a marketing book here, there's an advertising book here, but not specific and not enough like in the exact area that I need. So for me, it's my librarians. My librarians are my best friends. At our college, they even have a forum like say, what do you need? What are the keywords that can help you out? And just because we're doing translanguaging and OER on that forum, it also asks us, do you need this in a language other than English? So my favorite resource is my librarians, who will then get onto a chat bot with librarians across the world and ask them, do you have something about the creative industries, or do you have something like this in Spanish? So those are mine, and thank you everybody who put what your favorite are in there. OpenStax, yes. Open University of Minnesota, SUNY's Oasis, and then anything else anybody feels like putting in. So any other questions or comments, because we are wrapping up then.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just opened up a blank Google Doc and said, this is your OER. What should go into it? kind of on the extreme.
Yeah, yes, but it worked.